Bob was 22 or 23 max when he won the universe. As someone who helped him, anabolic-wise was pathetic.
Oh, he used very small amounts.
Oh God, ridiculous.
I think anybody can basically be big, but to be big and beautiful is another thing. And it also takes a keen eye to point out the fact that someone else is out there that has a beautiful physique, and you can verbally say that. And I'll be the first one to say that Bob Harris, the physiques are not only, very athletic and heavily muscle bound, and I would take that classical look over the freaky size any day.
There was a time when bodybuilding meant something different, when aesthetics mattered more than extremes, when the human form could be powerful without being grotesque. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the most extreme, and he refused to pretend. But Bob Paris was something the sport had never seen before.
And from that V-shaped body that we always have been idolizing, wide shoulders, small waist, big thighs, big calves, and it's kind of like the Greek ideal of, where you have kind of like I always talked about, to make a cross across the body, an X I should say, and you have the delta would be the top of the X, and the calves be on the bottom of the X, and the smallest part in the middle is kind of where the abs are.
What I'm trying to present when I'm working in an artistic realm is the beauty of the human form. And I try to get across more than just the two-dimensional that's on the piece of paper. I'm trying to put a personality across, and I think that's one of my main strengths as a bodybuilder, is that I can cross over to a general public market and appeal to not only the hardcore bodybuilding fan, which I am very much a hardcore bodybuilder, but also to the artistic fan and to the person walking down the street. Won't be offended by my physique.
With a physique that looked like it was sculpted by ancient Greeks, a mind sharp enough to see through the industry's lies, and courage that would cost him everything, Bob didn't just compete in bodybuilding, he tried to save it. They called him the flawless marvel, not for what he hid, but for what he revealed. Beautiful, honest, dangerous. While others injected themselves into oblivion, Bob asked the question no one wanted to hear: what are we becoming? And in 1989, he told a truth that would make him the first, a truth that made him a hero to millions and an exile to the sport.
I lost about 80% of my business, literally had doors closed in my face. There were a number of times where my life was threatened. Some death threats came by phone, by mail.
But what happens when you're too perfect for a sport built on imperfection? What happens when you speak truth in an industry built on lies? What happens when the most aesthetic athlete in bodybuilding history refuses to become a monster? This is the story of Bob Paris, the Greek god who tried to warn us. Part 1. Origins. Columbus, Indiana wasn't Venice Beach. It was cornfields, quiet streets, and small-town expectations. Robert Clark Paris was born here on December 14th, 1959, the second of 5 kids in a family that fractured early. As a boy, Bob lived between worlds. He was an artist at heart, drawing, painting, writing stories, but he also tried to blend in, playing football and running track to prove he belonged. He didn't. At 17, everything changed. One afternoon, his teacher sent him to grab a fan from the back of the school gym. Behind stacked wrestling mats, he found a forgotten weight room. Dusty machines no one had touched in years. He stayed. 90 minutes later, drenched in sweat, something inside him had awakened.
See, I started when I was 17, and I was a football player who needed more size, and I started training, and everything happened right, and it all went to the right places.
2 weeks later, he saw a magazine with Arnold Schwarzenegger on the cover. Massive, controlled, powerful. Bob read every word. For the first time, he saw a path where he could be both artist and athlete, where his body could be his canvas. But the sport had rules nobody said out loud. At 19, he sat in a doctor's office and walked out with a bottle of Dianabol. Within days, his strength climbed and his body rounded with new muscle. He learned the lesson young. Everyone did it, nobody admitted it, and asking questions made you the problem. Bob's philosophy was simple. Build a physique you'd want to have, not just one that could beat the judges. He trained hard, stayed covered up, and chased symmetry, balance, and beauty over brute size. While the sport moved toward chemical extremes, Bob held on to an older ideal, mastery over mass. Bob's philosophy was simple. Build a physique you'd want to have, not just one that could win a trophy. His body wasn't a billboard for bulk, it was a sculpture. Every workout was designed around proportion, shoulders matching quads, arms complementing chest, a waist tight enough to draw the eye upward to a perfect V-taper.
When I'm training, I'm picturing that perfect physique and trying to attain that. If that happens to coincide with what the judges want, then that's fantastic.
He trained covered up, hoodie, sweatpants, head down. No mirror flexing, no theatrics. If a muscle wasn't responding, he changed tactics. A different angle, a slower tempo, a longer squeeze. One of his trademarks was tension over weight. He'd take a moderate load and make it feel heavy by controlling every inch of the rep. For shoulders, he often used trisets, dumbbell lateral raises, front raises, bent over rear delt raises, no rest in between. The goal wasn't ego weight, it was roundness and shape. Leg days were brutal but calculated. He'd start with high rep squats, 15, 20, sometimes 25 reps, to flood the muscle with blood, then move to leg presses with slow negatives and deep stretches. Quads, hamstrings, and glutes all had to flow together. No one body part was allowed to overpower the others. Arms were built the same way, curls with pauses at the top, rope pushdowns with controlled stretch. Preacher curls where his elbows never moved an inch. He chased the look of proportion, not cartoonish size. And while most bodybuilders avoided cardio like a curse, Bob did 20 to 30 minutes every single day, even on rest days.
Bob, how much bicycling do you do? How long do you ride?
Yeah, 30 minutes a day right now. 30, maybe 20 twice a day. Right after workouts. I don't.
You find it speeds up your metabolism?
Yeah, that's all I use it for. Because I'm not looking at it as a workout or anything nearly that intense.
You think a lot of people, maybe ride too much?
Yeah. Well, what happens is if they
How much is enough?
I'd say half an hour a day is out, 40 minutes, or at the very most an hour, maybe half hour twice a day.
He believed conditioning was part of aesthetics, part of health, part of being an athlete, not a slab of mass that got winded walking stairs. His diet followed the same logic: 5 or 6 meals a day, steady protein, moderate carbs, clean fats. No dirty bulking. No ballooning to cartoon size, then starving down for shows. He treated his body with respect, not as a chemistry experiment. While bodybuilding raced toward chemical excess, huge guts, swollen faces, insulin spikes, scale-obsessed mass monsters, Bob held to a different ideal. Fluid posing, graceful motion, a body that looked as good in motion as it did under stage lights. He still believed in the original dream of bodybuilding, mastery over mass. Part 2, The Greek God. By 1981, Bob Paris had escaped Indiana. He'd lived in his car in Santa Monica. He'd worked odd jobs. He'd trained with an obsession that bordered on religious fervor. And within 2 years of arriving in California, he'd won Mr. Los Angeles and Mr. Southern California. The world was starting to notice.
It was the physique of Bob Paris in 1983 that originally got me to really holistically get involved with bodybuilding. And that's when I started bodybuilding, was 1983. His was the first physique of perfection that I liked. I wasn't trying to model myself after him, but I appreciated his overall package.
In 1983, at just 23 years old, he captured both the MPC National Championships, Mr. America, and the IFBB World Championships, Mr. Universe, two of the most prestigious titles in the sport, in 1 year. Joe Weider himself had noticed him a year earlier, squeezed Bob's arm backstage and rasped in that accordion under a dump truck voice, "That's quite an arm you got there. Gonna be a champion, eh? Maybe I'll put you on the cover. Bob rode home that night. Joe Weider told me I was a future champion. I'm really starting to get somewhere now. Standing at 5'11" and weighing 230 pounds in stage condition, Bob Paris wasn't just big, he was perfectly proportioned. Wide shoulders, impossibly small waist, razor-sharp abs, every muscle flowing into the next like a Renaissance sculpture come to life. When Bob Paris made his pro debut at the 1984 Mr. Olympia,
it's a dream come true for me. For the past 5 years, I've dreamed of coming to this point in my career, and now it's been very exciting. I've spent a lot of this last year traveling, doing appearances for the Mr. Universe type, and my training has been very intense for this because I really want to make the best showing and to be in the best shape that I can for the show.
Well, what about the intimidation factor? You've been up against the best amateurs in the world, but now you're up against former Mr. Olympias, former professional champions, really good bodybuilders. When you're going in there, how confident can you be, and how can you deal with the psychological pressure of knowing how good these people are?
Well, the pressure that would apparently be there, I tried to take off myself somewhat, because my training philosophy has always been, as I was training for the Nationals and the Universe, to train only for my best condition and not necessarily worry about who the competition was going to be and who was going to be in what shape and who was going to be big and this and that. I see myself as training very hard and just focusing on making myself the best bodybuilder I can be. And therefore, if I were to get caught up in all this stuff of who was going to win and why a rookie couldn't win the contest, I would be so mentally scrambled that I couldn't have any success whatsoever.
It comes down to the bottom line, I guess. In coming back to bodybuilding now and training again, my bottom line is to win the Mr. Olympia. I mean, that's the big draw that brings me back to it.
Bob Paris, like Benfato, is another Mr. Clean. He turned down acting contracts worth $1 million to compete in Mr. Olympia.
he placed 7th, ahead of former champions Sergio Oliva and Chris Dickerson. He entered the professional circuit with considerable promise. Between 1984 and 1992, Paris competed in around 32 pro contests, and although he placed 3rd multiple times, he never secured a first-place win. Despite his aesthetic excellence and early hype, he did not capture the Olympia crown or other top pro titles. In 2006, Flex magazine would name him the most aesthetic athlete in the history of bodybuilding. But by then, the sport had already chosen its direction, and Bob Paris was no longer invited to the party, all because of one big secret. Part 3: The Secret. At 21 years old, Bob Paris made a decision. He came out to his family, his friends, and the people who ran his sport. He told them he was gay.
From the time I came out to myself at around 21, I very quickly came out to everyone, my family, my friends, the people who ran my sport. I wanted to be very upfront as I was, and this was very early in my career, but there was this expectation that family, friends, and people you do business with is one thing, but to the public, there was this level of discretion that you were supposed to have.
Their response was clear. We know. We support you, but keep it quiet. The public can't know. For years, Bob lived in that strange in-between, out to those close to him, invisible to the world. He gave interviews where he spoke naturally about his life, only to have those parts edited out, every single time. Then in 1989, he met Rod Jackson. They fell in love, and Bob realized something fundamental. If I hide this, if I shove it in my back pocket where no one can see it, I'll chip away pieces of it until there's nothing left. When journalist Lonnie Tepper approached him for Iron Man magazine that July, Bob didn't hesitate. He told his truth, all of it. The article made history. Bob Paris became the first active professional athlete in any sport to come out publicly, not retired, not in decline, at the height of his powers, competing at the highest level. The response was overwhelming. 30,000 pieces of mail arrived, most of it supportive. Shortly after, Bob appeared on Oprah Winfrey's show with Rod. Oprah asked the question everyone was thinking.
Why not just stay in the closet? I mean, you're bodybuilding, you're Mr. Universe.
You fall in love, and when Rod and I met, we found a spiritual bond between each other. And you develop this relationship and this move toward marriage, and you find that if you bastardize it and you stick it back in your back pocket where no one can see it, then pretty soon you chip away pieces of that bit by bit until you have absolutely nothing left.
Bob, why not just stay in the closet? Bob's answer was simple, devastating, true. You fall in love, and it doesn't feel right to hide it. For many in 1989, when 70 to 80% of Americans considered homosexuality a sin, Bob's honesty was revolutionary.
When you came out in 1989, the Los Angeles Times said that 70% of Americans thought that homosexuality was a sin.
Right.
So being at the forefront, or right when your career was starting to gain momentum,
You became a symbol, an inspiration, living proof that you could be powerful and authentic at the same time. But in bodybuilding, the backlash was swift and merciless. Death threats arrived.
For me, the repercussions were tremendous. I lost about 80% of my business, literally had doors closed in my face. My life became this whirlwind, what eventually turned out to be a 5-year intense period of activism, being out there on the front lines, fighting for equal rights. There were a number of times where my life was threatened. Some death threats came by phone, by mail.
Most painful of all, the doors that closed came from people within the gay community itself. People who'd known his story, who'd worked with him for years, suddenly couldn't return his calls.
One of the more difficult aspects for me was that some of the doors that closed for me were from people in the industry and our community who knew my story. I wasn't closeted. They knew my story, and then those contacts and those avenues that I had nurtured and developed over the years prior just poof.
Bob had committed the unforgivable sin in bodybuilding. He'd told the truth. His actions led to the bodybuilding world boycotting him in a time when the word canceling didn't even exist. Paris kept getting worse placements as judges discriminated against him due to his coming out. Decades later, in the comment section of a YouTube video, he would share his unfiltered thoughts and disappointment at bodybuilding. I only wish I'd clued in way earlier. Sometimes in life, we chase ghosts for years and years, beyond when the ghosts should have dissipated. And I will declare this here and now. I should have won the 1984 and 1985 Mr. Olympia. Only bigots and drug morons kept me from that. I accepted 7th and 9th because I'm a mensch and, at least back then, a team player. But I'm planting this flag. I should have been Mr. Olympia in 1984 and 1985. Full stop. A disappointing end to the dream which was promised by Wider himself. But discrimination was not the only thing that would get in his way. There was a change brewing in the industry that would corrupt the very sport he loved. Part 4. The Rise of the Mass Freaks.
Well, it's my view that in the sport right now there is a major problem. And without making it a dictation of morals whatsoever, because that's not the way I operate, I see the problem being the abuse of anabolic steroids. It's so blatant nowadays. In both the men's and the women's aspect of the sport.
In 1990, the IFBB announced mandatory drug testing at Mr. Olympia. Finally, Bob thought, finally the sport would clean itself up. He decided to compete naturally, or as close to it as possible, believing this was bodybuilding's chance to save itself. He didn't even qualify for the Olympia that year.
I'm very much against anabolics. I'm not saying that I've never used them, but I'm very much against them. But to have the feeling that I must use them in order to compete, to be forced to do that is extremely frustrating and disillusioning.
The fans who screamed for drug testing suddenly complained that the athletes weren't freaky enough. The show stunk, they said. The conditioning wasn't extreme. Where was the mass? Where was the spectacle? The IFBB got the message loud and clear. Fans wanted mass monsters, not aesthetics. They wanted chemicals, not purity. They wanted the freak show, not the art form. Within a year, drug testing was abandoned. A random computer lottery was announced to test athletes throughout the year. Bob never heard of anyone being selected. Neither did anyone else. After about 12 months, testing was never mentioned again. The sport had made its choice. The death of Momo. In 1992, Bob Paris traveled Europe for a Grand Prix tour. That's when he watched Mohammed Benaziza die. Momo arrived sick, vomiting, losing weight, but he had a wife and 3 kids in France, bills to pay, a contract to honor. He kept saying he'd be fine, he'd compete. During prejudging, Momo left the stage repeatedly to vomit blood. His skin turned gray with a greenish tint from the spray tan mixing with illness. He wobbled, nearly collapsed, and still he competed. He suffered a heart attack on stage and died. It wasn't the steroids alone that killed him. It was the diuretics, the growth hormone, the insulin, the dehydration from contest prep, the pressure to compete even while dying. The entire system, designed to extract every ounce of mass from the human body. Consequences be damned. Bob stood backstage after it happened. Other competitors shrugged. It's the risk you take, they said. People get hit by buses. Bob realized something terrifying. Death had become acceptable, normal, just part of the game. In all the recent articles written about Momo's death, Bob couldn't recall a single one demanding stricter drug testing. The sport simply moved on. Another show, another competitor willing to risk it all for a trophy. That's when Bob Paris began to hate bodybuilding. The prophet was right. The sport he left behind only got worse. Throughout the 1990s, as insulin and growth hormone joined the steroid cocktails, bodybuilders began to resemble something beyond human. Dorian Yates arrived, 250 pounds of concrete muscle with conditioning that looked like shrink-wrapped beef, 6 Mr. Olympia titles, the first true mass monster of the modern era. Then Ronnie Coleman, 8 Mr. Olympia titles at 300 pounds, density and size that redefined what was possible and what was acceptable. The gut distension began, the blocky waists, the loss of the V taper, the freakish, almost alien proportions that made even hardcore fans uncomfortable. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the man who built bodybuilding into a mainstream sport, began speaking out. Professional bodybuilding is going in the wrong direction, he warned. It's becoming really dangerous. Sometimes it kills people.
But then eventually it became more and more clear to me that, wait a minute, we're getting more and more away from the ideal physique and from that V-shaped body that we always have been idolizing. And now the body could appear much more blocky on stage. And so I started looking into it more and more. And why is that? I started talking to the judges. I said, what are you looking for? And all this. And more the judges said, well, the way the judging procedure is set up and the rules are set up, it lends itself for us to look for the biggest guy.
As early as 1996, Arnold was criticizing mass monsters for their inability to control their midsections. By the 2010s and 2020s, his criticism grew more direct. I ask myself as a judge, whose body do I want to have? That's what it comes down to. The answer, increasingly, was none of them. The sport responded in 2016 by creating the Classic Physique division, an explicit attempt to return to golden era aesthetics. Weight caps based on height, emphasis on V-taper, proportion, symmetry. Everything Bob Paris had embodied 3 decades earlier. Danny Hester won the inaugural title, then Breon Ansley, then Chris Bumstead became the face of the division. 6 consecutive wins that proved fans were starving for beauty, not just mass. But the open division, the main event, continued its march towards extremism.
When did you see the shift sort of happen where it used to be about Mass was just part of it, but it was about shape and structure and beauty and aesthetics. When did you see things starting to go over toward just the biggest body on stage?
Well, I think that Lee Haney, I thought, was kind of the last of the ideal bodies.
Athletes like Nick Walker, 5'7" and 310 pounds in the offseason, nicknamed the Mutant, represented everything Bob Paris had warned against. Massive, blocky. Or how about Big Ramy, the freak from Egypt who pushed the onstage max weight all the way to 315 pounds. Impressive in the way a freight train is impressive, but beautiful? Hardly.
Remember that we have gotten rid of the posing category many years ago. And this is really the first time where I really started paying attention to that and saying, wait a minute, why did we get rid of the posing? Well, the bodybuilders didn't like it. So I said, what do I give a what the bodybuilders like? I mean, it's like going to a gymnastics event and saying, hey, do you like this particular discipline? If you don't like it, we cut it out. How stupid is that?
Bob had been right all along. He'd seen where the sport was heading in the 1980s. He'd warned about the dangers, the deaths, the loss of artistry, the transformation of bodybuilding from an aesthetic pursuit into a pharmaceutical arms race. He'd been called a prophet, and prophets, as history shows, are rarely welcomed in their own time. Part 5. A Different Life. After Bob Paris walked away from competitive bodybuilding in 1991, he didn't disappear. He reinvented himself over and over again. First, he enrolled full-time at the Stella Adler Studio of Acting, spending 2 years diving back into his first love, theater. He studied with respected teachers including Vincent Chase and Arthur Mendoza. He performed in regional productions, Blythe Spirit, Glass Menagerie, and in 1997 made his New York stage debut at Carnegie Hall in the musical Jubilee, opposite Bea Arthur and Sandy Duncan. He'd always been an artist. Now he was an artist who happened to have been a bodybuilder. Bob also wrote. His fitness books, Beyond Built, Flawless, Natural Fitness, and Prime, became authoritative guides emphasizing self-respect and sustainable training. But his masterpiece came in 1998, Gorilla Suit, a memoir that Frank Zane called brave, and Sam Fussell praised as the first honest book about bodybuilding ever written. In Gorilla Suit, Bob pulled back the curtain completely. He wrote about his troubled childhood, his struggle with identity, his complicated relationship with Joe Weider, his disillusionment with a sport that rewarded excess over excellence. Someone was telling the truth.
Being in the public eye definitely had an adverse effect on my relationship with my ex-partner. We were very different people. We had very different ideas in our approaches toward the world. I tried my best to continuously keep the relationship going, even when I knew better. I felt I would be letting down the cause, that I would be giving fuel to people who hated gay people and said we couldn't sustain relationships and were anti-equal marriage. After the relationship ended, I retreated. So for 2 years, I lived out in this house in the woods and was utterly convinced that I was never going to be in a relationship again.
In 2003, Bob married Brian Lafergie in British Columbia after immigrating to Canada and becoming a citizen. They'd been together since 1996. While his 7-year relationship with Rod Jackson had made headlines and ended publicly, his marriage to Brian was quieter, more stable, the life Bob had always wanted but thought he'd never have. Today, Bob lives on Pender Island in the Gulf Islands of British Columbia. He shares a cottage with Brian and their standard poodle, Cole. He writes novels, screenplays, poetry.
I was hearing music. I was trying to find it.
Out there in the middle of the night.
Yes.
He takes long walks. He's been photographed by Bruce Weber, Herb Ritz, and Robert Mapplethorpe. He advocates for LGBTQ+ rights and athletes' rights. He continues to speak about bodybuilding's problems with brutal honesty. And his physique? Gone. Almost unrecognizable from his competition days. Without the steroids, without the extreme training, Bob's body settled into something natural, something human. At 65, he's fit, but no longer massive. Sinewy arms, a lean frame, the exoskeleton shed. Just like Paul Dillette, just like so many champions who walked away from the drugs, Bob's body returned to what genetics had always intended. The temporary had been shed. What remained was real. Bodybuilding could have been so much more, he said. We had a chance to make it about beauty, about health, about inspiring people to be their best selves. Instead, we chose the freak show. Bob Paris never won Mr. Olympia. He never became a household name like Arnold. He never built a supplement empire or hosted a reality show. But his legacy runs deeper than trophies. Bob Paris lost his sport, but he kept his soul. And in the end, that's the only victory that matters.